Tonight on Bridge City News, Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman stopped by our studio recently to explain why the city has reached out to both the province and the feds for help in dealing with our city's drug crisis. The city of Lethbridge is hoping to go green in a big way with the potential purchase of electric transit buses. We have the details. And the man accused in the shooting deaths of 11 people at a Pittsburgh synagogue appeared in court for the first time today. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman is reaching out to both the provincial and federal government for help in dealing with our city's drug crisis. Spearman, along with 22 mayors, sent a letter to the federal justice minister calling for stronger penalties for drug trafficking. A second letter was sent to the provincial solicitor general and minister of justice to create new legislation to use law enforcement to detain and transport those addicted and using drugs in public places to safe sobering facilities. A third letter was then sent to the chief prosecutor in Edmonton asking for a full-time federal prosecutor in our city to help with the high volume of drug cases. Spearman says our city needs the help right now.
And I've been lobbying very hard to the provincial government, asking them for the services that we need here in the city of Lethbridge. We need a safe sobering site where people can be transported who can't make competent decisions. If they're out in public and they're inebriated, intoxicated, we need to be able to protect public safety and support our enforcement organizations. We need to have supported housing so that people can progress from supervised consumption into treatment, into recovery, and then supported recovery. Make sure that they're housed and that they have the supports to be successful in their attempts to escape from addiction.
Spearman says with both the provincial and federal election taking place next year, it is becoming more urgent to get the requests in right away. The drug crisis continues to rear its ugly head in our city. Lethbridge police say from what they have seen, meth has overtaken opioids as the drug of choice on the streets. But when it comes to those visiting our city's safe injection and consumption site, it is the complete opposite. Arch's managing director Jill Manning says over the past 7 months, they've actually seen a drop in meth users from 68 to 39%.
I can understand that from the police's perspective, opioid users typically kind of have easier behavior management after they've consumed because opioids are a depressant, and so they'll typically sedate people, whereas methamphetamine is a stimulant, and so after use people will oftentimes be more elevated and sometimes kind of present some unique and more difficult and challenging behavioral issues. So from an optics perspective, that may be what's being addressed more by police. However, what homeless and street involved use shows actually reflects the opposite trend.
Lethbridge is hoping to go green in a big way. The city is looking into purchasing 7 new fully electric buses. If approved by the Alberta Community Transit Fund and the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, the buses would cost about $800,000 each. The total cost would be $5.6 million. If council was to approve the purchase, savings for fuel and maintenance per bus would be around $31,000 a year. Transit Operations Manager Scott Gricio thinks that his team's plan will have a great impact globally.
That seems to be the future. That's the way the funding's going. It's an opportunity to be a steward with the environment. It's an opportunity to be sustainable in the future, and it's proven that the technology is out there.
The life cycle of each bus is around 12 years. The City of Lethbridge is looking at developing a mobility and accessibility master plan. It is to make our facilities more accessible to those who have mobility issues. A public forum on the issue is being held at City Hall now until 7 o'clock this evening. If you're unable to make it to City Hall, you can also voice your concerns on the city's website and online forum. Lethbridge City Council has unanimously approved nearly $23,500 to the New West Theatre. The approval is in order to mitigate effects of construction at the Yates Theatre. The theatre has been undergoing a $13.4 million renovation since last fall. Improvements include new lighting and sound, fully accessible washrooms, a new elevator, and a new sprinkler system. Operators of a popular toy are going to be subjected to government regulations. Lethbridge residents can now train to obtain a drone pilot's license. Transport Canada, which controls the country's airspace, is developing rules and regulations to dictate how recreational and commercial use drones are operated and how they are to align with general aviation. A 3-day recreational use course will be available for a cost of $600. 3 skiers were injured after being swept away in an avalanche in Banff National Park. Avalanche Canada says Parks Canada responded to a satellite distress call yesterday from the group who are on the east ridge of Mount Patterson on the park's northern edge. None of the three were buried but sustained serious injuries, including broken ribs. Crews evacuated the trio to a waiting ambulance. The city of St. Albert, just outside of Edmonton, is close to its goal of raising $500,000 to honor 4 Humboldt Broncos. Officials with the St. Albert's Remembrance Committee say they were touched by the loss of 16 people who died in April during the tragic bus crash. 4 of the players who died, Logan Hunter, Jackson Joseph, Connor Lucan, and Stephen Wack, previously played hockey in St. Albert. Once a bronze stick sculpture and 4 memorial benches have been purchased, the remaining $350,000 will be used for scholarships in the names of the 4 players. If a new bill gets passed, the Alberta government will be able to regulate tuition. The province says the act, which was tabled yesterday, would pave the way for the government to cap a college or university's average tuition and apprenticeship fee increases. The new bill would allow the province's advanced education minister to regulate mandatory non-instructional fees and international student tuition. The government says university students taking an average price program would save almost $2,000 on a 4-year degree. The premiers of Saskatchewan and Ontario say they want to reduce trade barriers between their provinces and have signed a memorandum on the issue. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says he wants to move quickly to facilitate internal trade.
We are identifying a number of specific initiatives where we are able to move very quickly at items, usually regulatory items, quite frankly, that are affecting how we can have free and flow trade between our provinces.
There's not going to be much better trade anywhere than between our provinces. For all of the talk about free trade with the United States, there's not enough action on free trade, as I said earlier, with Canada. And you saw it at the First Ministers' meeting when Premier Moe and I were there about internal trade between each and every single province. We all worry about the US, Mexico, Canadian trade deal, but we have to start knocking down the regulations and barriers between the provinces.
The Liberal government introduced pay equity legislation yesterday for federally regulated employees. Labour Minister Patty Hajdu says the goal is to ensure equal pay for both men and women in jobs considered of equal value.
Pay equity is a very important component of the work that we're doing to make sure that every person has a fair chance at success in this country. Because in fact, we know that when women have equal opportunity in the workforce, when they're paid equally for work of equal value, that in fact it's not just women who benefit, but it's our economy. So the pay equity legislation that we've tabled today will require federally regulated employers to establish plans and to examine the difference in compensation between positions that are held mainly by women and men that are deemed to be of equal value. And the intent of the legislation is to close the gaps. It really is meant to address the consistent undervaluing of work that is considered predominantly female. We will be appointing a pay equity commissioner within the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and the goal is that we reach a state of equilibrium where equal pay for work of equal value is achieved.
The man accused in the Pittsburgh synagogue massacre appeared briefly in a federal courthouse today in a wheelchair. Robert Bowers is facing charges in the deaths of 11 people.
Today, Robert Bowers made his first appearance in federal court. The judge advised him of the charges against him. He is detained in jail without bond. The federal magistrate judge scheduled a hearing for Thursday, November 1st at 10 a.m. At that time, we will have the opportunity to present evidence demonstrating that Robert Bowers murdered 11 people who were exercising their religious beliefs, and that he shot or injured 6 others, including 4 of whom were police officers responding to the shooting.
Robert Bowers, the suspect in the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, made his first appearance in federal court. A judge read him the charges, and he waived a description of the penalties. A preliminary hearing was set for Thursday. Bowers spent the brief hearing, a lot of it talking with his attorneys, but from the courtroom you could see that he was wearing a blue sweatshirt. He said very little, yes, and I think yes, sir, that kind of thing to the judge. And the marshals loosened his handcuffs, half of his handcuffs, so he could sign court papers, and then he was wheeled right back out.
Vigils were held in both Toronto and Montreal yesterday, remembering the 11 who were gunned down in cold blood in a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
There's no question, the aftermath of an attack like this leaves everyone a little bit uneasy. And everyone is going to be asking questions about security in the coming days and about what should be done and what can be done to increase the level of security without sending a message that Montreal Jews are in danger, without sending a message that it's unsafe to be in a synagogue.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada will always stand against anti-Semitism and violence. The Prime Minister made the comment in response to Saturday's massacre in Pittsburgh.
May the families of those murdered be comforted, and may the injured recover quickly and fully. We're working with U.S. authorities and are ready to assist if required. Mr. Speaker, we will always stand united against hatred, intolerance, anti-Semitism, and violence.
U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions says the shooting that killed 11 people at the Pittsburgh synagogue is an attack on all people of faith.
We're still reeling today from the murderous rampage in Pittsburgh that took the life of 11 congregants, targeted because of their faith, worshiping faithfully in their own synagogue. This was not just an attack on the Jewish faith. It was an attack on all people of faith. It was an attack on America's values of protecting those of faith. It cannot and will not be tolerated.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, says it appears as though anti-Semitism is on the rise.
To say that over the last decade, anti-Semitism is on the rise would be accurate. We look at the schools, the synagogues, the cemeteries here in the United States and around the world that have been desecrated. The fact that anti-Semitism is so loosely kind of dismissed as something that's okay or something that is in vogue or something that just happens, mind-boggling.
Catch my full interview with Lisa as we discuss terrorism and a treaty banning nuclear weapons coming into force by the end of 2019. Those stories and others coming up in the second half of our show. It seems like almost every day in our newsroom, Israel makes headlines. The founder of Out of Zion Ministries, David Silver, stopped by our studio recently to not only discuss the shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue, but also to educate us. Silver says there are a lot of misconceptions around the name Palestinian.
The people we call the Palestinians are a modern-day myth. They're an invention. They didn't exist before 1967, and most people don't know this. And before 1967, whenever anybody mentioned Palestine or Palestinians, they were talking about Israelis. It was the Palestine Bank, the Palestine Orchestra, the Palestine Electric Company. They were all Jewish organizations, not Arabic.
Silver also discusses if we will ever see peace in the Middle East and what it will take to get us there. Watch the entire interview coming up after business news. A high school student in North Carolina was shot and killed yesterday during a fight with a fellow student in a crowded school hallway. School Superintendent Clayton Wilcox says it was an isolated event.
First reports indicate that the conflict began with bullying that escalated out of control, and as fear took over, a young person brought a gun to solve the problem.
It was about between 5 to 7 minutes later, after the shooting took place, that a teacher was able to get word out that she was actually with the shooter, and he admitted to what he had done and was ready to surrender.
Indonesia's president visited the Jakarta port where bodies and debris from the Lion Air crash are being unloaded. The new Boeing 737 went down just 13 minutes after takeoff, killing all 189 people on board. The crash is the worst airline disaster in Indonesia since an AirAsia flight in December of 2014 crashed, killing 162 people. Indonesian airlines were banned in 2007 from flying to Europe because of safety concerns, though several were allowed to resume services in the following decade. New Toronto Blue Jays manager Charlie Montoyo says having respect for players is among his top qualities. Toronto introduced the former Tampa Bay bench coach as the replacement for John Gibbons, who left after last season.
I think I'm a blend of old school and analytics. So, I think using both, I think that makes you a better manager. And yeah, but no, I wouldn't say I'm just one way or the other. Looking at this team from the other side almost reminds me of the team we have in Tampa. A lot of younger kids. There's going to have to be a lot of player development deals we got to teach. And But honestly, I wasn't even thinking about that for the last couple of days. I wanted to make sure I got this job first before I started thinking about it, because that's what had happened when I got called up to the big leagues. I didn't even call my mom and dad until I was in that bench, make sure they didn't change their mind. So.
And good luck next season going out to the Blue Jays. Not a bad day in the Windy City. It almost felt like baseball weather, didn't it? But there's a chance of showers developing. When? I'll have a complete look at the weather picture in just a moment. Lots of sunshine again today. Tonight, just a few clouds developing with a low near +1. Tomorrow, a chance of showers developing with a high near 10. Thursday, a mixture of sun and cloud with a high of 6 expected. Warming considerably on Friday with the mercury increasing to 14. Saturday, mainly sunny with a high near 11. Sunday, mostly cloudy with a high near 8. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 10 degrees with an average low of -3. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1958 at 24 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -25 in 2002. Sunrise was at 8:17, sunset at 6:13. Let's have a look at how tomorrow's shaping up across the country. More rain in Vancouver with a high near 11. Showers and 12 degrees expected in Victoria. A mixture of sun and cloud in Calgary on Wednesday with a high of 9. Edmonton will also be cloudy and 9 degrees. Clearing in Regina tomorrow with a high near 6. Overcast and 7 is on tap for Saskatoon tomorrow. Winnipeg will be mainly cloudy and 3 degrees. Over in the central part of the country, Toronto will have showers and 15. Ottawa will also have rain but only get up to 5 degrees. Rain and 6 for Montreal on Wednesday. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have light showers and 7. Halifax, Nova Scotia will also have rain and 9 degrees. Charlottetown, PEI will be mainly cloudy and 7. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, they're expecting rain and a high of only 8 degrees for tomorrow. Stats Canada is about to require Canada's 9 biggest banks and credit unions to turn over personal data about their customers and not tell the customer. Reports say that will include people's names, addresses, social insurance numbers, and every single banking transaction that person did in a year. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sees Stats Canada getting access to your personal information as vital to providing services to Canadians. Trudeau says his government is working with a privacy commissioner to ensure personal data is not made public. The plan is to seize banking records of 500,000 Canadians each year, beginning in 2019. WestJet Airlines says rising fuel costs were to blame for a big decline in third quarter earnings. The Calgary-based airline reported a profit of $45.9 million, but that is down from $135.9 million from the same time last year. Revenue totaled $1.26 billion for the quarter, which included the busy summer travel period. That is up from $1.21 billion from a year earlier. WestJet says the decline in profit came as fuel costs per liter were up 37% from a year ago. Calgary-based Inter Pipeline has reached a deal to add to the 16 European storage terminals it owns through its subsidiary, Interterminals. It says the deal with Texas-based NewStar Energy is worth $354 million. Inter Pipeline says it will add 6 liquid storage terminals in the United Kingdom and 1 facility in Amsterdam. CEO Christian Bale says the additions will make Inter Pipeline the largest independent storage operator in the UK and the world's largest gasoline blending hub. Cineplex is launching a pilot project in Edmonton of an upgraded loyalty program that will cost $6.99 a month. Scene Gold will provide moviegoers with access to priority concession lines, free upgrades to premium screens, and no-cost upgrades on popcorn and drinks. It will also offer movie tickets on Wednesdays for fewer Scene points. Scene Managing Director Matthew Seagram says the program will not replace the current Scene Points program, but is aimed at rewarding the most avid members. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman reached out to the federal justice minister calling for stronger penalties for drug trafficking. Spearman also wants to see new legislation brought in to use law enforcement to detain and transport those addicted and using drugs in public places to safe, sobering facilities. Spearman is also asking for a full-time federal prosecutor in our city to help with the high volume of drug cases. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. Jewish communities around the globe are still in mourning after a gunman opened fire, killing 11 people at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. According to our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, anti-Semitism is on the rise, not just in the U.S., but in many parts of the world. Hear what Lisa has to say next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Looking for a fun place where you and your kids can play? Come for a fun family night Thursday evenings from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. to the Family Center in downtown Lethbridge. Me and My Family promotes learning through play and provides a safe place for kids to explore through physical activity, imagination, and creativity. For more information, visit famcenter.ca or call 403-320-4232. The Miners Days Historical Association of Colehurst is holding its annual Christmas craft sale on Saturday, November 3rd from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Colehurst Community Center. Come out and see unique gift ideas from over 40 vendors. You're invited to the Knox United Church annual Fall Supper being held Sunday, November 4th at the Tabor Community Center from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m., featuring delicious roast beef and cabbage rolls. Tickets are $15 for adults, $6 for youth ages 6 to 12, and those 5 and under are free. Tickets are available at the church office or at the door. Takeout will be available. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
11 people are dead and many others injured following a horrific attack at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Joining me now is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, the Jewish community around the world is in shock and mourning right now. What's the latest?
Yeah, to think this could happen in broad daylight in 2018 in such a tight-knit community. The more we read about these victims and about this synagogue, about this community, about the neighbors, about the outpour of support globally by Jews and Christians and Muslims, it's horrific. It's horrific that this could happen. It's horrific that this would happen in such a synagogue in a day where a joyous celebration was taking place. There was a baby circumcision, which is takes place on the 8th day of a newborn baby's life when they do the circumcision, called a brit milah or bris in Hebrew. And guests of the family were there and celebrating this brand new baby's life. And to have such a horrific incident happen, to have these individuals living among us, the neighbors of the perpetrator, claiming that he was just a quiet guy, a bit strange, but just a quiet guy who came and went, and for him to take 11 lives and to have this platform. When we look at the social media posts that this individual put up, against Jews, against African Americans, against Donald Trump, against Hayas, which is a nonprofit organization that helps Jews migrate around the world from danger zones. And for him to have such strong feelings and to act out those feelings. When he was arrested, he told authorities, "I just want to kill Jews." It's exactly what he did when he went into that synagogue Saturday morning.
Lisa, it seems that anti-Semitism is on the rise, not only in the United States, but around the world. Why do you think that is? Is it tied in with a lot of extremist ideologies?
Perhaps. I mean, let's go back to this premise that anti-Semitism is on the rise. A lot of people want to connect this with President Trump's presidency, that the fact that somebody from the White House podium speaks his mind is giving rise to those who have extremist points of view. So you have Antifa, you have the KKK sympathizers, etc., and people want to point fingers to the White House. First and foremost, this individual was anti-Trump, just as he was anti-Jew. Secondly, we read about over 7,000 incidents of anti-Semitism under the Obama presidency that were either underreported or not reported. So to say that this is because of Donald Trump's presidency might be a directed But to say that over the last decade, anti-Semitism is on the rise would be accurate. We look at the schools, the synagogues, the cemeteries here in the United States and around the world that have been desecrated. The fact that anti-Semitism is so loosely kind of dismissed as something that's okay or something that is in vogue or something that just happens. Mind-boggling how far we've come to have the Holocaust deniers. I mean, this is modern history. We have people who are alive who can attest to the horrific experiences they had in death camps, and then to have other individuals dismiss that or even deny the fact that such a horrific incident took place. Imagine what will happen 50 years, 100 years, 200 years down the line when we don't have these firsthand sources to tell us about their experiences. So it is true that these incidents are on the rise, just like all hate crimes are on the rise, actually, Hal. More than half being attributed to anti-Semitic hate crimes or threats. But overall, this has to be stopped. This has to be addressed on both sides, whether it's pro-Trump, anti-Trump, whether it's because of other leaders around the world, whether it's because people feel that they are free to express emotion over facts. That is, I think, the underlying theme here, that people have emotions and they act upon those emotions. Social media has given a large and liberal, lowercase l, platform to those who want to spew hate. And it's damaging. It's damaging. I feel sorry for the children who are growing up watching this, thinking that this is the norm, thinking that this is what happens in the United States or in the West overall. It's a sad time. It was a sad weekend. And I think many, not just the Jewish community, are in mourning and in shock around the world after this horrific incident.
Tragedy in the skies as an Indonesian 737, a new aircraft, crashes after just 13 minutes of taking off with 189 people on board.
There are no survivors expected in this, and the rescue crews who are working around the clock are only expecting to find remains at this point. This is another notch on the tally of horrible aviation practices, guidelines, standards in Indonesia. We hear of many of these crashes, but this one was, I would venture to say, less expected because this was a brand new aircraft, only 13 minutes airborne when no emergency signal was emitted, but there was an indication that they wanted to return back to the airport before making this flight. It was a short flight out to one of the Indonesian islands, and again, 189 on board, all expected to have died.
U.S. President Donald Trump says the Saudis staged the worst cover-up ever when it came to the killing of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Lisa?
Yeah, well, Donald Trump is under a lot of pressure to put the Saudis under pressure because of this incident. Why does he call it a bad cover-up? Well, because there was no reason for this cover-up or lack of transparency, as we saw from the Saudi regime. This incident took place. It was days and weeks before we saw the Saudis come out and actually acknowledge that it was a murder, acknowledge that it was at the hands of those at the consulate, acknowledge that it was premeditated. So that came in 3 separate steps. Unfortunately, first we got the acknowledgement that this happened. Second, they said it was a mistake or a fight broke out, and this was the result of that fight. And lastly, more recently, they said that this was in fact a premeditated murder. Again, because of the pressure, the international pressure by the Europeans, by the United States, by the Turks, for the Saudis to come clean about this murder. And again, much symbolism was riding on this. The fact that the Saudi foreign policy with the United States was on the line, or whether or not we should have a relationship with the Saudis if in fact they can't be transparent, or if in fact they committed this murder. More weight than it deserves, but it was a murder and it should have been confessed long before it was.
And pressure from Canada as well. And we have an arms deal with the Saudis just like the United States has. So it'll be very interesting how it all plays out. Lisa, first it was a caravan of Honduran refugees setting out for a better life in the United States. And now 300 Salvadorans are heading to the land flowing with milk and honey. Lisa, Central Americans have had enough with living in poverty in their own countries, so they're making the trek.
Sorta, kinda. I think there are a lot of well-intentioned people from Central America on that caravan. Reports have indicated that there are also non-Central Americans on that caravan, people from countries in the Far East and Middle East, many men who are escaping and hoping for a better life. But a new report says that Mexico offered these individuals, which now number about 7,000, jobs, life, housing, etc., before they reach the U.S. border, and many have said no, which begs the question, are they really seeking asylum? Are they really seeking safety and refuge from a life that they are running away from, or are they merely trying to cross over the U.S. border? In response, the Pentagon has said that they are sending an additional 5,000 troops to the border, in addition to the 1,000 or more that are already there. That number, beefing up that security, is meant to help with the border patrol, to keep things calm, to be able to control these masses, and to prevent them from coming into the United States. This is more of the same. I think it's an interesting time we live in, where this debate of immigration is seen as a partisan issue. Mind-boggling, because immigration, national security, counterterrorism, I bunch them all together as issues that affect the masses. They affect all of us, including jobs and the economy. I mean, these individuals, if they're able to get past the border, and how, as you know, they can come right up, march right up and enter Canada in the same way, they affect all of us. And it should be looked at as probably in a more holistic way as to whether or not our societies can and should absorb these numbers.
Sri Lanka is looking for help from China for phone evidence over an assassination plot of the Sri Lankan president. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, good luck with that, Sri Lanka. So there is an assassination plot in which information leading to this plot can be extracted from a cell phone. And because of that, Sri Lanka has a law where you have to go to court and get permissions, very similar to what we have here in the West, to have that permit to then go and ask for that information on a cell phone. So now they are begging the Chinese for access to that information so that they can get more details as to what this plot was. It was targeting more than just the president and people around him as well. But good luck with that. I don't think the Chinese are very keen on giving out information or access to their technology. So
not exactly,
we'll see how this plays out.
Right, not an open book. The owner of the Leicester Premier English Soccer Club, along with 4 other people, were killed recently when their helicopter went down following a match. Tell me more about that.
Yes, this was an upsetting story, and especially for those who follow soccer, or football, I should say, in that part of the world. This is a Thai billionaire, the owner of the soccer team, who was revered by so many and described as a very kind, generous, giving individual who purchased this team for fun and attended matches and was well loved and revered. And unfortunately, his private helicopter went down. He and 4 others died instantaneously, and he is being remembered and celebrated, frankly, all across social media and across the world.
The leaders of Germany, France, Russia, and Turkey recently talked about the importance of a lasting ceasefire in Syria. They said they struck a committee, but now they're trying to create a new constitution by the end of 2018.
Right, good luck with that. We've had many years, almost 7 years, where we're heading towards a decade, and this will continue on and on. The list of countries you just mentioned, Hal, included both Russia and Turkey. And the elephant in the room has been, always will be, that these 2 countries are on opposite sides of the war in Syria. Now, when you have opposite sides, opposite agendas, opposite outcomes desired in the war in Syria, it becomes very difficult to agree on what kind of outcomes we want and what a ceasefire entails, or what a resolution entails, or what a constitution entails. When one side, Turkey, is supporting those who don't want Bashar al-Assad in power, and Russia, the other side, wants Bashar al-Assad in power and is doing everything they can to keep Bashar al-Assad in power along with the Iranian regime, what kind of resolution can these 2 sides come up with in a constitution where we can't agree on who should lead the country? This has been the elephant in the room with regards to the Syrian civil war for years and years and years. And for a long time, the issue with ISIS kind of was a mask for this underlying issue. And we've always said, individuals like myself, pundits have said, well, if we get rid of this ISIS problem overnight, in the morning we will still have to deal with this underlying issue. Should Bashar al-Assad stay or should he go? And when you have two sides fighting on different sides of that issue and outcome of that issue, we cannot agree on a future for Syria. And here we are. And they can talk about ceasefires, they can have meetings, and they can meet and meet and meet. But until we resolve what we want for a future for Syria, it's going to be very difficult to come together for a resolution.
News out of Geneva, Switzerland. A treaty banning nuclear weapons could come into force by the end of 2019. Signatories promise to reject nuclear strategies and encourage others to follow suit.
Sure, this is a very wishful thinking, and we would all love a happy kumbaya world without nuclear weapons. But here we have an idea, I should say, and it's nothing more than that, to come together, bring the world together, to sign, to do away with nuclear weapons. They did this before for other types of warfare, and it's lasted, or at least it's been implemented in a way where this idea has spread. Now they believe they would have 25 to 30 countries that would sign on to this treaty. But I have a feeling you're going to have a very hard time getting countries like Iran and North Korea to sign along. And for political reasons, of course, when those countries chest thump only because of their ability to stay on the 1 yard line or to have or achieve nuclear capability, they're going to be very reluctant to give up that capability. But of course, again, we applaud the effort. And again, in an ideal utopia, we would love to have a nuclear-free world.
Solid football reference there as well. I love that, the 1 yard line. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks, Lisa.
My pleasure.
In any given news cycle, Israel will almost always be part of the conversation. This tiny nation is always in the center of Middle East tensions. Joining me now live in studio is David Silver, the founder of Out of Zion Ministries based in northern Israel. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Yeah, shalom, Helen. Shalom to all of the viewers.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom to you as well.
Yeah.
Now let's start talking about the shooting, the tragic shooting which happened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 11 people lost their lives. Just incredible what happened. The guy went in there. He wasn't even Muslim. He was running in there. Anti-Semitism, is it on the rise in the United States and here in North America? What are you seeing?
Well, I'm seeing anti-Semitism on the rise throughout the world, specifically in much of Europe, and specifically in countries where there's a large growing Muslim population. But I'd just like to clarify that it's not anti-Semitism. It's a misnomer, because that word anti-Semitism comes from the name of one of Noah's sons, Shem. And so the Arabs and the Jews, we are Semites because we are descended from Shem. It's not anti-Semitism because many people who love the Arabs, and I'm not saying we shouldn't love the Arabs, but they love the Arabs, they hate the Jews. So I believe what it really is it's the spirit of Antichrist, because what they're doing is they're coming against Israel and the Jewish people. And from my understanding of Scripture, the Lord's not coming back until Israel is ready to welcome him back. So any attempt to stop the Jewish people or to get rid of them is really an attempt to hinder the second coming of the Messiah. So I would say it's the spirit of Antichrist, but it is on the rise all over the world.
It's just amazing. Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like ever since God said, "You are my chosen people," you know, Jews have been attacked around the world.
Well, again, you know, it's not against us, it's against the God who we represent. And actually, in Psalm 2, if I can get the scripture right, it says, "Why do the nations rage? Why do the peoples plot a vain thing?" And it doesn't say against the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. It says against the Lord and his Messiah. So this whole thing really, it's a conspiracy against the God of Israel and his Messiah, the Christian Jesus.
So why is there so much opposition to the state of Israel?
Well, again, I believe we're living in the end times, and I believe that the re-emergence of the nation of Israel on May 14th, 1948, and the fact that it's still there in spite of all the opposition, I believe that the state of Israel and what's going on there is actually the most solidest signs and indications that we truly are living in the end times, because as I just quoted the Bible verse, Acts 3:21 says that that the Lord must remain in heaven, but when he comes back, he's coming back to Jerusalem to be the King of Kings, to rule and reign from a rebuilt temple on the Temple Mount. That might help people start to understand why we're seeing what we're seeing happening in the news.
Some people have a hard time supporting Israel because of the fact we hear the stories of Israeli troops opening fire at unarmed youth protesters. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's not thoughts, Hal, they're facts. The news media, as Donald Trump would say, is fake news. And the last,
except what you see here on Bridge City News.
Yeah, exactly. Or my news reports as well, but which is why I put out a weekly news report. But you cannot rely on secular news. You can't even trust a picture anymore. You can Photoshop a picture. They can use graphics and fake video. Now, I'm not saying everything the Israeli army does is right. We're humans. We make mistakes. Both of my sons are soldiers, have been soldiers in the Israeli army. They've been involved in wars, and they've come home and told me that their own lives have been placed in danger because their orders were not to harm innocent people. And you know, there's a man, he was the head of the British Army in Afghanistan, Colonel Richard Kemp. He said that the Israeli army is the most moral army in the world. So please, viewers, don't listen to what the news media is saying. Check it out. And even I at times believe what I see, but every time I find out that it's not what they said it was.
Okay, let's talk about land claims. The Palestinians on one hand say, no, the land is ours. The Israelis say, no, the land is ours. And the battle continues and rages on.
Yeah.
Will we ever see an end to this?
Yeah,
Peace.
well, you know what God says? He says the land is mine. And he said, I'm giving it to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So really, you didn't ask the question, but just to help the viewers understand, the land belongs to God. He gave it to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as an eternal inheritance. And the people we call the Palestinians are a modern-day myth. They're an invention. They didn't exist before 1967, and most people don't know this. And before 1967, whenever anybody mentioned Palestine or Palestinians, they were talking about Israelis. It was the Palestine Bank, the Palestine Orchestra, the Palestine Electric Company. They were all Jewish organizations, not Arabic. So what happened, of course, is in 1967, at the end of the Six-Day War, Yasser Arafat and the PLO came on the scene. They realized they had a very powerful tool in the hands of the media, and they began to speak about a Palestinian state and a Palestinian people. It never, ever existed before. And I've actually got a quote at the back of my book, which we might talk about later, but I've got a quote from the PLO saying that the Palestinian people do not exist. So it's a modern-day myth.
The Palestinian Liberation Organization.
The PLO.
Yeah, I remember reading about them. Social studies when I was in school. Okay, what about the Gaza Strip? Let's talk about the tensions and the fighting in Gaza. Will we ever see peace there?
Well, I don't believe we will until the Messiah comes, because one of his descriptive names in Isaiah 9 is Prince of Peace. He's the Prince of Peace. And again, Gaza is a legitimate part of the covenanted land. And again, before Yasser Arafat stirred everything up, there was no border fence, and many, many people from Gaza would come across. They would work in Israel, they would receive their wages, they would go back, and they were living well. But the Hamas got into power and decided that they were going to do everything they can. They're still doing it. Last weekend, they fired 30 rockets from Gaza into Israel on Friday afternoon, and they are doing everything they can, and they manipulate their people to do everything they can to destroy Israel. So we've got no option except to put up a fence, and we just stand there and we defend our nation and our people from all sorts of rockets and burning balloons. I'm sure many of the viewers know what's really going on there. So sadly, maybe if Hamas is dislodged and another government comes in, there will be a time of peace. But the thing is, the whole thing is being really orchestrated by the devil himself, and he won't give up trying to destroy Israel again, because he's trying to stop the second coming of Messiah.
So how about if we give Palestinians a big portion of land? Will we see peace then?
It won't make a difference. In fact,
No?
there's no Jewish people in the Gaza Strip. There's not one soldier, there's not one civilian, there's nobody there, and they still are at our borders every Friday and Saturday creating havoc and violence. And actually, Yasser Arafat had an insignia on his uniform, and there's no Israel. They want the whole thing, and again, without them probably knowing it, they're serving the purposes of the devil, trying to stop the second coming of Messiah.
Is Israel really concerned about Iran's nuclear ambitions?
I think we really are, because we pulled off a major coup, and we snuck out 50,000 CDs or DVDs with all of Iran's nuclear information on it. So we know they really are working towards achieving nuclear capability, and no points for guessing which country would be the first recipient of a nuclear weapon from Iran. They openly call for the destruction of Israel on a regular basis.
Okay, you've mentioned it a little bit earlier. Let's talk about the Muslim influence and immigration into countries like Germany and France. A lot of Syrians and people from Iraq, a lot of war-torn countries moving in, and a lot of those countries open their borders, like Angela Merkel, German Chancellor, right? So what are your thoughts on that? Are we seeing that's contributing to a big rise of the anti-Semitism? Was a lot of us like to say
ultimately it will do. And my thoughts are, sure, if there's a legitimate refugee crisis, we in the West who are much more wealthy need to do something about it. But why not establish something closer to where they live in their own environment? Saudi Arabia, one of the richest nations in the world because of their oil, they have I think 100,000 air-conditioned tents that they use for people to come when they come for the Hajj to Mecca. They have not taken one refugee in.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it's because it's a plot.
Is Muslim? I mean,
Muslim. Why don't they take their own people? And they could house 1 million people in those tents. But what's happening really is, I believe that they are using these refugees. They're changing the demographics of the nations. I saw one lady. She in the height of this refugee crisis, probably 1 or 2 winters ago, sludging through the mud and the wet with her babies. Just arrived in Greece or somewhere, and an interviewer asked her some questions. The first thing she did was she rallied against Israel. So sadly they've been brainwashed, and that's all they can think of. And the Christian Church, we need to pray for these Muslim people to be set free of that.
What is Canada's relationship with Israel like today compared to what it was like under the Stephen Harper and the Conservative government with the Liberals? Are we just as close with Israel today, or is there a little more of a distance? Because some would argue that our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is more compassionate to the Muslim community, the Islamic community.
I'm hearing these things as I'm traveling around, and I know that Stephen Harper was a real God-fearing, Bible-believing man. I thought he was a wonderful leader, and the relationship between Canada and Israel was absolutely wonderful, probably one of the best in the world. But it has dramatically deteriorated.
Strained, perhaps?
Dramatically. Well, our media people, our government people, we monitor the news. We know what's being said, and we know that it has totally changed from the time of Stephen Harper until now. But at least Justin Trudeau said some nice things on Saturday after the tragedy at the synagogue.
Right. How about the relationship with the United States now that Donald Trump has been president for a while now?
Now that's the opposite, of course, because under Barack Obama there was no relationship. He was openly rude to our Prime Minister, and we could see whose side he was on. But Donald Trump, some people like him, some people hate him. I'm not talking about him as a person, but as a politician, I really believe he's doing the right thing. I don't believe some Americans seem to think that he's a man of God. I can't see that. I don't think he's a man of God, but he's definitely God's man for the time in which we live. And the two most unpopular leaders in the world today would be Donald Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And I believe the reason for that is because they stand for the purposes of God.
Now, even though Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East, even though they're quite liberal with some of the social policies, yet they tend to be negatively viewed by most Western academics. Why do you think that is?
Well, most academics are seriously left-wingers, and they just don't like they don't like the fact that Israel is even a biblical nation, and the legitimacy for Israel is based on the Bible. So of course these academics don't like it. And there was a Jewish journalist in the United Kingdom called Melanie Phillips, and she said something like this. She said, most of the world, when it comes to the Middle East and Israel, most of the world is totally delusional. And she said the worst offenders are the media, the intelligentsia, and the politicians, and of course the education, the higher education, because they think they know everything, but of course they're not using the Bible as their reference point.
Okay, let's talk a bit about your organization, Out of Zion Ministries. Tell our viewers a bit about that.
Okay, well, it's based on Isaiah 2, verse 3, which says, in the last days, which we believe is now, the word of the Lord shall go out from Zion. So I became a Messianic Jew 31 years ago in Auckland, New Zealand, which is why I talk funny.
Great accent, love it.
And,
what do you think of the Canadian accent?
Yeah, well, we love it, and we love Canada.
Okay.
We're very soft because, of course, we're Commonwealth countries,
right.
so we have a lot in common.
A lot of history.
So about 5 years after I I became a believer, I really believe I heard God speak to me 7 times in 1 week, telling me to take my family and go and live in Israel. So we've been living on Mount Carmel in northern Israel for 26 years, and for the last 21 years, this ministry's been in place, Out of Zion Ministries, and what I do is I travel the world, just trying to help the church understand how Israel and the church fit together, what's really going on, the things I've been sharing with you, in this program, and getting on radio, TV, any exposure I can to get the truth out. So I really appreciate this opportunity.
Where are some of the most volatile regions right now for Jews around the world?
Well,
outside of the Middle East,
Germany, Belgium.
Oh,
France.
Is that because of the Muslim influence?
Yeah, I mean, there's terrible events have happened in France. We're hearing that 70% of French Jews are now making serious preparations to get out and come to Israel. Well, come to Israel.
Really?
Yeah, well, part of, I don't want to put the blame on God for anything that's happening, but, the scriptures say, the prophets said that one day God will bring all of the Jewish people back to the land before the Messiah comes. So these are part of the prophecies that need to be fulfilled. So, even the Holocaust, I mean, what a terrible, the words can't even begin to describe it. But I don't believe that God did it, but I believe that God used it. And out of the tragedy of the Holocaust rose the nation of Israel, and the nation was reborn. So we do believe that there's a shaking going on. God's shaking the world. I believe He's shaking the secular world with the weather and the earthquakes and everything that's happening. But I also believe He's trying to shake the Jewish people out. And God forbid, if some people are injured and lose their lives, I don't know what to say, but it's just part of what is happening in the world. The real tragedy would be if the Jewish people don't wake up, because the Zionists traveled around Europe for 40 years before the Holocaust and warned the people to get out. They said, no, it's okay here, it can't happen here, I'm a doctor, I'm an orchestral conductor, I got a good life here. 6.5 million perished.
So this hatred of the Jews around the world right now, David, how can we change people's mindsets? Does it start with education early with their children in schools?
I don't believe it does, because there's an organization called the Anti-Defamation League that operates primarily in North America. And they travel the world trying to educate people about who Jewish people are, because they say, well, if the non-Jewish world is educated, there won't be any anti-Semitism or persecution. But Germany was the most educated, civilized country in the world in 1939. So it's not a matter of here, it's here. So to answer your question, Hal, I believe that the only way we can stop this is to really pray. It's a the heart of it is a spiritual problem, and part of my message to the church, really, or the primary part of my message to the church is pray more. Pray more for protection, pray for the Jewish people to get saved, pray for the Muslims, pray for any of these radical anti-Semites to really have a revelation of who God is, and not mess with God's people, because in Genesis 12 verse 3 it says, I will bless those who bless you, and it goes on to say, I will curse, or actually in the Hebrew it says, I will curse or destroy anybody who makes light of the Jewish people. So, what happens to us in our lives really is dependent upon how we behave towards Israel and the Jewish people.
David Silver, founder of Out of Zion Ministries, thanks so much for joining me in studio today.
Thank you. Shalom.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Shalom. Have a great night.